Welcome back to my channel. February is Women in Horror Month, so what better time than now to watch a bunch of really good horror movies directed by women. In this video, I'm talking about some of the best horror movies directed by women that you need to watch right now. Let's get started. First up is Pet Sematary, directed by Mary Lambert. Pet Sematary is the adaptation of the Stephen King classic of the same name. It centers on Dr. Lewis Creed. He uproots his family to this beautiful home along a busy road, and behind his home is this pet cemetery that can bring people back to life, or it brings pets back to life. You shouldn't bury people in there, but he does. He does. So tragedy strikes for Lewis, and he decides to utilize this pet cemetery to his advantage, and things don't go well. This is an excellent adaptation of Stephen King's book. It is emotional, it's moving, it's got a horrifying scene involving the death of a child that you will never get out of your head, and it also has scary, scary moments featuring the infamous Zelda in the book. She's just horrifying. Next is Raw. Raw centers on a young, talented 16-year-old girl. She comes from a long line of vegetarians and veterinarians. She's off to vet school where she has to deal with some super intense hazing, and one of the things they force her to do is eat meat, and it has some unexpected consequences and changes her completely. This is a really interesting and unique coming of age story, specifically a coming of age story for females. It is very similar to Ginger Snaps in that way, where we see this character who is experiencing this horrific thing while also trying to deal with being a teenage girl. And while she's going through all this, she's really coming into her own. She is discovering her sexuality and just becoming more confident in herself. And it's just this whole metamorphosis, and I love that it's told through this interesting cannibalism angle. Next is the Slumber Party Massacre. This is directed by Amy Holden Jones. This is an 80s campy horror movie classic. This story centers around a group of high school girls who are terrorized by a killer with a power drill during their slumber party. So initially this movie was meant to be a comedy, which is why there's a lot of weird humor in this film that actually works for me. It makes the film more enjoyable because it's so weird and awkward, but during the production they decided to make it a straight up horror. So it's this weird mix of horror comedy, and it has a feminist angle to it. It's just very unique in comparison to other slashers because you feel like you're watching real teenage girls who act like real teenage girls, who seem like they're actual friends trying to get through this thing together, and you actually root for them. You actually want them to survive. I think it's a super clever horror movie from a female director. Next is Saint Maud by Rose Glass. Saint Maud centers on a young nurse who is still recovering from a traumatic experience at her previous job, and she's turned to God for answers. This story deals with a lot of intense themes of loneliness, trauma, and it focuses on religious fanaticism and highlights how far some people are willing to go for their religion. It has some really unsettling, disturbing moments, and it has one of the most shocking conclusions I've ever seen. Next is The Invitation by Karen Kusama. The Invitation centers on a young man who is invited to a dinner party by his ex-wife and her new partner, and when he gets there, he soon learns that there's some sinister plans for this dinner party. This story centers on loss. It is super intense, and it's a slow build with, it's just filled with dread, and you know something bad is going to happen, but you don't know what it is, and when it does happen, it's just off the wall crazy. Next is another film by Karen Kusama. This is Jennifer's Body. Jennifer's Body centers on a high school cheerleader who is possessed and begins eating her classmates. This story has some really witty dialogue from Diablo Cody. It says a lot about female friendships, especially female friendships in high school, and and it has a lot to say about what it's like growing up female and all the stuff we struggle with. And it's just a super funny, clever horror movie from a female's perspective. Next is The Babadook, directed by Jennifer Kent. This story centers on a single mother who is still reeling from the tragic loss of her husband, and she's trying to cope with this while raising their son, who is going through his own issues. This story is focused entirely on loss, depression, grief, and the power of depression, and how if you don't deal with your depression or your issues, it can swallow you whole and it can make you a monster. And it's beautifully done. The monster is creative, and it's just a really moving, sad story with great performances. Next is Near Dark, directed by Kathryn Bigelow. This story centers on a young Midwestern boy who meets this beautiful stranger and he falls in love with her, and soon he realizes that she comes from a family of nomadic vampires. These vampires, they don't give a damn about anybody but themselves. They are vicious, they are violent, they are unpredictable and dangerous, and they're scary. This is not a feel-good vampire story. It's not a feel-good love story. It's horrifying. It's a scary, scary story, and it's a road movie. So there's a lot of moving components to this. I think it's super just gritty, and it makes you feel dirty, and I love that about it. Next is Revenge. Revenge centers on a young woman who is spending a romantic, or so she thinks, a romantic getaway with her boyfriend until his friends show up and things take a turn for the worst. She is assaulted and then she's left for dead. However, she unexpectedly goes through this rebirth and she decides to embark on a journey of revenge. It's beautiful to watch. It's stunning watching her transformation. She really goes through hell, and we see everything through the female POV, and it's not shown through the male gaze. So it's a really powerful, emotional watch about this woman dealing with her trauma and getting justice for it. It's extremely satisfying. I love it. It deals with horrifying things, but it makes it almost easy to watch because of the way it's shot, if that makes sense. And lastly, we have The Love Witch, directed by Anna Miller. This is a stunning throwback to films of the 60s. It centers on a young, beautiful witch named Elaine who is just looking for love, but she has trouble finding it, and there's some spells involved. This movie, like the title says, is very bewitching. It's spellbinding, it's mesmerizing, it's just stunning to look at. It's filled with bold and beautiful colors, and it's unique and clever and funny. Elaine is hilarious to watch, and I love what it has to say about the relationships between men and women. I think it's a fun, wild ride. And there you have it. Those are only a few of the best horror films directed by women. There are a lot of talented female horror directors out there who are telling incredible stories, and it's just exciting. It's exciting to be getting more of these stories. Please tell me ones that I didn't mention that you think I need to watch, because I want more. I want more female horror movies. Let me know if you liked the movies I discussed, what you think of these movies. I will leave all my social links down below so we can connect on Instagram and talk there about female horror. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you have an amazing Women in Horror Month and you get some good horror in this month, and I will catch you next time. Bye.